Welcome to my channel, Soldier's Legacy. And today's story is one that will stay with you long after you hear it. It begins inside a cold, bright operating room where life and death hung by a thread. A Navy SEAL, torn apart by shrapnel, lay unconscious on the table. His blood pooled beneath him, his pulse weak. Slipping away by the second, the surgeons fought to keep him alive, their voices sharp and urgent. The chief surgeon barked an order, his frustration cutting through the chaos. Clamp suction. Move faster. We're losing him. But then his eyes fell on a quiet figure standing beside him, a young nurse. Her face calm, her hands steady, her presence almost unshaken by the storm around her. He dismissed her in a single sentence. "You're only a nurse. Stay out of the way." What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she carried a story that had never been written in books. A past sealed in silence. And it was about to reveal itself when the wounded SEAL, half conscious, whispered words that froze the entire room. "You have no idea who she is." The silence that followed was heavy. The heart monitor beeped slowly, filling the air with the reminder that time was running out. The surgeon frowned, confused. While the nurse's eyes flickered with something no one could quite read, she didn't speak. She simply returned her focus to the patient. The SEAL's lips moved again. His voice cracked, raw, almost breaking, but everyone in the room heard the single word that left his mouth. Angel. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a prayer. It was a call sign. The surgeons looked at each other in disbelief. The word belonged to rumors, stories whispered among soldiers late at night. And now, here it was, spoken by a man on the edge of death. The nurse's eyes glistened for the first time, but she didn't lose focus. She pressed her hands against the wound with exact force, tilted her head toward the anesthesiologist, and gave calm, precise orders, orders that sounded less like those of a nurse and more like those of someone who had led men through war itself. The surgeon hesitated, his pride colliding with the truth he could no longer ignore. She wasn't just assisting, she was guiding them all. Hours passed. Sweat beaded on foreheads. Gloves tore, were replaced, tore again. Blood transfusions were rushed in one after another. The man on the table fought, his body failing, reviving. Failing again. Through it all, the nurse, Angel, never once broke. And then, as dawn painted the horizon outside the hospital windows, the SEAL's pulse stabilized, his breathing steadied against all odds. He lived. The room exhaled. Nurses leaned against walls, exhausted. The surgeon pulled off his gloves, his hands trembling, his voice softer now. "Who are you?" he asked her. She removed her mask slowly. Her eyes were tired but steady. "I'm just a nurse," she said, but the surgeon knew better, and so did the SEAL. Her story had begun years earlier, long before the hospital. She was 22 when she first stepped into combat boots, her life stretching out ahead of her in a direction few women had dared to walk. Trained as a medic, she learned not just to heal, but to survive in the fiercest storms of war. She carried no illusions. She knew she would be underestimated, doubted, perhaps even dismissed. But she also knew that when bullets fly and blood spills, rank and pride mean nothing. Only skill and courage matter. Her first deployment was Afghanistan. A valley ambush. A convoy destroyed. Soldiers pinned down under fire. When the call for a medic came, she ran, not away from the chaos, but into it, with bullets cracking the ground around her. She pulled the wounded to safety, treating injuries with hands that never shook. When supplies ran out, she improvised. When air support was delayed, she held the line. When hope faded, her voice calm and steady, brought men back from the brink. That was the night the name Angel was born. To some, it sounded strange. To the men she saved, it was the only name that made sense. She was not just a medic. She was something beyond. Someone who gave light in places where darkness swallowed everything else. For years, her missions were buried in classified files. She carried her wounded brothers through deserts, jungles, and cities torn apart. She never asked for recognition. She never demanded respect. She simply served, and when her service ended, she didn't stay in the world of uniforms and medals. She walked away quietly, traded her rifle for scrubs, her battlefield for hospital halls. She wanted to heal without the sound of gunfire in her ears. She wanted to live without being called a hero. But legends don't die just because the world stops speaking of them. They live in whispers, in scars, in the memories of men who owe their lives to a name they never forget. Angel was one of those legends. Now, back in the hospital, the surgeon sat in silence long after she left the room. His arrogance from earlier haunted him. He had reduced her to only a nurse, blind to the strength she carried, blind to the weight of her past. The seal survived his wounds. Weeks later, when he regained full consciousness, he asked about her. "Did Angel save me?" He whispered. The young nurse smiled softly, but said nothing. She never confirmed, never denied. Some truths, she believed, were best kept quiet, but the seal knew, and so did the surgeon. From that day forward, he never again underestimated the quiet ones in his team. He understood now that sometimes the people who carry the greatest power are the ones who ask for none. And so, the story of Angel remains half-remembered, half-spoken, passed down in fragments and whispers. Soldiers still speak of her in hushed tones. Some claim she saved entire units. Others say she once stood alone against impossible odds. But the truth is simpler, far more powerful. She saved lives again and again without hesitation. Not because of glory, not because of recognition, but because it was who she was, and in the sterile light of a hospital operating room, she reminded everyone, surgeons, nurses, soldiers, that true strength doesn't need titles. True heroism doesn't demand attention. And sometimes, the greatest warriors are the ones we dismiss as ordinary, because there is no such thing as only a nurse. Thank you for watching. This is Soldier's Legacy. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these powerful stories alive for the world to hear.